Resuming the Sisters by James Joyce, part of the Dubliners. I wondered at this, for, as my uncle had said the night before, he had taught me a great deal. He had studied in the Irish College in Rome, and he had taught me to pronounce Latin properly. He had told me stories about catacombs and about Napoleon Bonaparte, and he had explained to me the meaning of the different ceremonies of the Mass and of the different vestments worn by the priest. Sometimes he had amused himself by putting difficult questions to me, asking me what one should do in certain circumstances, or whether such and such sins were mortal or venial or only imperfections. His questions showed me how complex and mysterious were certain institutions of the Church, which I had always regarded as the simplest acts. The duties of the priest towards the Eucharist and towards the secrecy of the confessional seemed so grave to me that I wondered how anybody had ever found in himself the courage to undertake them. And I was not surprised when he told me that the fathers of the Church had written books as thick as the post office directory and as closely printed as law notices in the newspaper, elucidating all these intricate questions. Often when I thought of this, I could make no answer, or only a very foolish and halting one, upon which he used to smile and nod his head twice or thrice. Sometimes he used to put me through the responses of the Mass, which he had made me learn by heart, and as I pattered, he used to smile pensively and nod his head, now and then pushing huge pinches of snuff up each nostril alternately. When he smiled, he used to uncover his big, discolored teeth and let his tongue lie upon his lower lip, a habit which had made me feel uneasy in the beginning of our acquaintance before I knew him well. As I walked along in the sun, I remembered old Cotter's words and tried to remember what had happened afterwards in the dream. I remembered that I had noticed long velvet curtains and a swinging lamp of antique fashion. I felt that I had been very far away, in some land where the customs were strange. In Persia, I thought, but I could not remember the end of the dream. In the evening, my aunt took me with her to visit the house of mourning. It was after sunset, but the window panes of the house that looked to the west reflected the tawny gold of a great bank of clouds. Nanny received us in the hall, and, as it would have been unseemly to have shouted at her, my aunt shook hands with her for all. The old woman pounded upwards interrogatively, and, on my aunt's nodding, proceeded to toil up the narrow staircase before us, her bowed head being scarcely above the level of the banister rail. At the first landing, she stopped and beckoned us forward encouragingly towards the open door of the dead room. My aunt went in, and the old woman, seeing that I hesitated to enter, began to beckon to me again repeatedly with her hand. I went in on tiptoe. The room through the lace end of the blind was suffused with dusky golden light, amid which the candles looked like pale, thin flames. He had been coffined. Nanny gave the lead, and we three knelt down at the foot of the bed. I pretended to pray, but I could not gather my thoughts because the old woman's mutterings distracted me. I noticed how clumsily her skirt was hooked at the back and how the heels of her cloth boots were trodden down, all to one side. The fancy came to me that the old priest was smiling as he lay there in his coffin. But no. When we rose and went up to the head of the bed, I saw that he was not smiling. There he lay, solemn and copious, vested as for the altar, his large hands loosely retaining a chalice. His face was very truculent, grey and massive, with black cavernous nostrils and circled by a scanty white fur. There was a heavy odor in the room, the flowers. We crossed ourselves and came away. In the little room downstairs, we found Eliza seated in his armchair in state. I groped my way towards my usual chair in the corner while Nanny went to the sideboard and brought out a decanter of sherry and some wine glasses. She set these on the table and invited us to take a little glass of wine. Then, at her sister's bidding, she filled out the sherry into the glasses and passed them to us. She pressed me to take some cream crackers also, but I declined because I thought I would make too much noise eating them. She seemed to be somewhat disappointed at my refusal and went over quietly to the sofa, where she sat down behind her sister. No one spoke. We all gazed at the empty fireplace. My aunt waited until Eliza sighed and then said, "Ah well, he's gone to a better world." Eliza sighed again and bowed her head in assent. My aunt fingered the stem of her wineglass before sipping a little. "Did he peacefully?" she asked. "Oh, quite peacefully, ma'am," said Eliza. "You couldn't tell when the breath went out of him. He had a beautiful death, God be praised. And everything... Father O'Rourke was in with him on Tuesday and anointed him and prepared him and all. He knew then. He was quite resigned." "He looks quite resigned," said my aunt. "That's what the woman we had in to wash him said. She said he just looked as if he was asleep. He looked that peaceful and resigned. No one would think he'd make such a beautiful corpse." "Yes, indeed," said my aunt. She slipped a little more from her glass and said, "Well, Miss Flynn, at any rate it must be a great comfort for you to know that you did all you could for him. You were both very kind to him, I must say." Eliza smoothed her dress over her knees. "Ah, poor James," she said. "God knows we done all we could, as poor as we are. We wouldn't see him want anything while he was in it." Nanny had leaned her head against the sofa pillow and seemed about to fall asleep. "There's poor Nanny," said Eliza, looking at her. "She's worn out. All the work we had, she and me, getting in the woman to wash him and then laying him out and then the coffin and then rearranging about the mass in the chapel. Only for Father O'Rourke I don't know what we'd done at all. It was him brought us all the flowers and them 2 candlesticks out of the chapel and wrote out the notice for the Freeman's Journal and took charge of all the papers for the cemetery and poor James's insurance." "Wasn't that good of him?" said my aunt. Eliza closed her eyes and shook her head slowly. "Ah, there's no friends like the old friends," she said. "When all is said and done, no friends that a body can trust." "Indeed, that's true," said my aunt. "And I'm sure now that he's gone to his eternal reward, he won't forget you and all your kindness to him." "Ah, poor James," said Eliza. "He was no great trouble to us. You wouldn't hear him in the house any more than now. Still, I know he's gone and all to that." "It's when it's all over that you'll miss him," said my aunt. "I know that," said Eliza. "I won't be bringing him in his cup of beef tea any more, nor you, ma'am, send him his snuff. Ah, poor James." She stopped, as if she were communing with the past, and then said shrewdly, "Mind you, I noticed there was something queer coming over him latterly. Whenever I'd bring in his soup to him there, I'd find him with his breviary fallen to the floor, lying back in the chair and his mouth open." She laid a finger against her nose and frowned. Then she continued, "But still and all, he kept on saying that before the summer was over, he'd go out for a drive one fine day just to see the old house again, where we were all born down in Irish Town, and take me and Nanny with him. If we could only get one of them new-fangled carriages that makes no noise that Father O'Rourke told him about, them with the rheumatic wheels, for the dirt cheap. He said, at Johnny rushes over the way there and drive out the 3 of us together on a Sunday evening. He had his mind set on that. Poor James."